Test was conducted on the 30th of May out in the Pacific. Here's a blue water chart that depicts the test construct. The ground-based interceptor was fired from Vandenberg Air Force Base. It was tracked by a Tippy-2 on Wake Island and the SBX in the Northwest Pacific, giving the interceptor solution to Vandenberg to intercept a target launched from the Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The red indicates the target flyout, and the green indicates the GBI from Vandenberg. Here's a picture of the target lifting off from the Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands, 5,000 miles away from the coast of California. This is the longest range target that we've ever flown, the highest altitude, and the highest closing velocity for an intercept. And this intercept was done with countermeasures. Next, you'll see a picture of the ground-based interceptor launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base out of a test silo that is completely production representative of the actual silos at Vandenberg, but this is what we test out of. The GBI is production representative of the CE2 Block 1s that will be fielded to fill out the 44 GBIs by the end of this calendar year. What you'll see next is an onboard sensor view of the kill vehicle, which is separated from the GBI, and what the kill vehicle saw in space. This is actual live data from the test. What you see in red is the warhead from the target, and what you see in green is its tank that's flying alongside, because in space everything flies at the same velocity. And you see the kill vehicle focused on the red warhead and eventually dropping out the other debris in the scene. What you see next is the kill vehicle in acquisition and terminal, and that's an actual picture of the reentry vehicle that was destructed beyond recognition. What you'll see here is another infrared picture of the target booster and the target warhead, with the booster of the GBI flying by literally a second before the kill vehicle killed the target warhead. We had 4 or 5 different sensors strewn across the Pacific to validate what you just saw. That was not a simulation, that was actual live data played back from the test. With that, sir, I stand ready for your questions.
So let's talk about Hawaii. Let's see, does the program that you're talking about, you asked for $21 million for new Hawaii ballistic missile defense radar, medium range discriminating radar, or the equivalent by 2021. Does what you're talking about, is that what you're going to have there as opposed to just the SBX?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Second question, have you looked at, and I know other people have, so specifically MDA, have you looked at using SM-3 Block 2s for the North Korean missile threat?
Yes, sir. We have done the analysis and looked at that extensively. We have not tested it yet.
Can you speak to that now, or we have to wait till the next hearing?
I can speak to it, sir. There is a inherent capability in the SM-32A to engage longer range threats in terms of what we believe the design space is. We have not tested against that longer range threat, but analysis indicates that that could add another layer of defense to Hawaii.
Okay. In that video, where were you shooting at in the U.S.? Like, where was the target?
Target was on Mek Island in the Kwajalein Atoll and in the Marshall Islands, and the interceptor was fired from Vandenberg in L.A.
No, I'm saying, where were you aiming the fake ICBM at in the U.S.?
It was going towards the West Coast.
Towards like San Diego or Los Angeles or something?
I won't say San Diego.
Okay. How high would it, right. How high would it have to be for Alaska to pick that up and not the SBX?
It would have, if you would have translated that scenario north, that scenario would have been picked up by the Alaska radar.
If it would be like San Francisco or higher or something?
Yes, sir, the construct that I described protects the entire continental United States.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's go to the SBX. In 2020, it's going to have to go dry dock, right?
Yes, sir.
So you're talking about building an actual radar on Kauai, right?
In the state of Hawaii.
Okay. So not the Pacific Missile Range facility?
That is one option. We haven't decided on location. There are 6 or 7 different locations we're looking at.
Does the Navy not want to do it at the Pacific Missile Range facility?
Sir, the Navy completely understands the need for the radar, and we're working closely with them on what operational restrictions would have to be in place at PMRF.
But you basically have to have this done by 2020.
We do.
Right. Okay, so I guess my next question is, if you do it anywhere in Hawaii, the Pacific Missile Range Facility excluded, are you going to have to go through an environmental impact study?
Yes, potentially. Yes, sir.
Through an actual environmental impact study. I'm from California. Okay, I mean, Camp Pendleton was basically closed down to Marine Corps assault from the ocean because of fairy shrimp in the sand, where they did an assault and walked on the hardball around the actual beach. Then they could proceed with their assault. Do you think you have the right time frame in mind if you have to do an EIS?
The time frame with an EIS would be challenging.
Is there any way to get around doing an EIS?
For reasons of national security.
And then you would do an environmental assessment?
Correct.
And that comes from OSD?
That's correct.
Okay, so you could say, because of national security and pressing existential threat to the United States reasons, we can bypass that.
That is my recollection of the options we have. But
do you have to use an EIS if you go on PMRF?
Let me take that for the record, sir.
Okay. The answer is yes. Yes. Okay. The answer is yes. We got it. Okay. Last thing is your MILCON budget request for the radar that will be in place before the SBX has to go into dry dock. Right? You have a date of 2021. Yet you have a planned IOC date of 2023, assuming a fully installed, integrated, and tested system. Question is, how does this time frame from initiation of MILCON to initial operational capability compare to like the LRDR?
Very similar.
Okay, so you're happy with the time frame of the SBX going away, which is what you use for this test. The SBX going away, and you having a medium range radar in place on the ground in Hawaii to take its place.
Sir, I would just offer a little different perspective. SBX, in my opinion, will not go away in 2020. Okay. It's got to go into a dry dock, and we've got to manage that operational risk. But the decision for SBX to go away will be both the NORTHCOM and the PACOM commanders' call. So
you could press that off. They could press that off if they had to by a year or two?
Absolutely.
I got you. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
So from the time, if you can say this in open session, from the time the ICBM was launched from Kwajalein, how long was it before the Vandenberg interceptor was launched?
About 10 minutes.
Then can you tell me where exactly did they intersect? Was it like close to Hawaii, closer to the West Coast, closer to the point?
It was about 2,000 miles west of California, but further to the north of Hawaii.
And the when the test was done and the interception took place, was it always anticipated that that would be the route that more than likely, I assume, that a missile, if launched from North Korea, would take? Was the basically the assumption made?
Yes, ma'am. In terms of being able to replicate the operational architecture down on the test range, which we did.
Now, one of the things that also in your statement, you talked about the radar, I think Homeland something radar for that. I don't know what the whole acronym was for Hawaii. Now, how long would assuming that radar is in the 2018 NDAA and then appropriated accordingly, how long is it expected for that radar to actually be built?
If the funding, is authorized and appropriated, we would then immediately do the aforementioned site surveys and finalize the site and the aforementioned environmental impact studies in parallel to prepare for a competition industry-wide for procurement of that radar. And to answer your question, we were counting on 2 years for that to happen. And the reason I was hedging on the environmental study is that sometimes that can take longer than that.
And though a lot of people assume that PMRF on the island of Kauai is probably the most logical place, I assume that there are criteria which may place it somewhere else, and that's why your response was as your response. I mean, we have 8 islands, and I'm assuming that you're looking at more than just Kauai as a site.
We are. Yes, ma'am.
The other thing is, in your statement, you speak to the fact that, if I can find it, that the the Pacific architecture to increase the defensive capability of the GBIs for the enhanced defense of Hawaii. Now, the GBIs are the ground-based interceptors. So when you say the enhanced GBIs for Hawaii's defense, what exactly do you mean by that?
There are, I'm sorry for the acronyms and the descriptors, but we talk about the GBIs as capability enhancements. Roughly the first 20 GBIs, which are the oldest GBIs, are referred to as capability enhancement ones. Capability enhancement twos were for simplicity's sake, comprised the next 10. And then capability enhancement 2 block ones comprise the balance of the 44. So the capability enhancement 2 block 1, which was tested, is the very latest GBI configuration, which will be fielded before the end of the year.
If I recall the testimony correctly, though, the 44 is Alaska and Vandenberg.
That's correct.
That's correct, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So when you talk about the capability of GBIs for enhanced defense of Hawaii, you're talking about Hawaii being defended from those locations.
From Alaska, yes, ma'am.
And I think that's one of the things that people don't seem to realize is that some people are under the impression, and if you can respond, I'd appreciate it, that somehow Kauai is the best vantage point to really protect the Hawaiian Islands. But in actuality, it is my understanding that it may not be the best location, that it is either north of Kauai or some other location like Alaska or Vandenberg maybe that would be the better location because of the where of an ICBM would track. Would that be correct?
Yes, ma'am. For GBIs at Alaska, that would not be that would certainly not be a recommendation of mine. I mean, GBIs in Hawaii would not be a recommendation of mine. Now, the defense that we get from Alaska in a orthogonal or a crossing trajectory is very good in defending Hawaii today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for 5 minutes.